Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the OT Lifestyle Movement Podcast. I'm Rhiannon Crisp, occupational therapist, personal trainer, and founder of OTLifestyleMovement.com. Today, we are talking all about the breath. And I find this such a fascinating topic because it's something that every single one of our clients does. You know, it's an involuntary automatic function of the body. And I'm so excited to be diving into how the breath works and why it's relevant to the clients that we work with. So today we are talking with Kate Broderick. Kate is the founder of Spot Therapy Hub, a speech therapy and occupational therapy practice in Sydney, Australia. Kate is dual qualified as both a speech pathologist and an occupational therapist, and is focused on providing clients with a unique holistic care experience. Kate has a special interest in orofacial myology, breathing retraining, as well as autism. And she is also the mother of 4 beautiful children. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome to have you here. What we always do at the start of the podcast, Kate, is just hit the rewind button. And if you can just take us on a bit of a journey to how you came to doing the work that you're doing today, because obviously you're trained as both an occupational therapist and a speech pathologist and have an incredible wealth of knowledge and wisdom that you bring to your clients. So can you give us a bit of background on your journey?
Sure. Well, look, I always was interested in health sciences, and so OT appealed to me just because it looked like a utilitarian degree that was going to enable me to help people. And I didn't know exactly what that was going to look like, but OT was certainly a degree that was going to give me the opportunity to work that out. And I absolutely loved it. And after graduating, I went straight into work, but I also felt like I should take on some extra study. And that led me down the path of linguistics, which really ignited a passion in understanding communication and thinking more about my clients' learning. So I was loving my work as an OT. And I think, I would describe it, or I have in the past, sort of as like bread and butter OT with kids, mainly working on fine motor skills, gross motor, self-care, regulation, all of that sort of stuff. But I was always interested, I suppose, in even sort of widening that net in terms of what I could be doing to support my clients to basically, be able to have the most, the best quality of life to achieve what was meaningful to them. And so I, in my early career, worked a lot in learning disability with dyslexia, dysgraphia, kids with ADHD, and as you mentioned, autism before. But something that really piqued my interest was working with kids with speech difficulties that were really complex, the tricky clients. And what I noticed was that a lot of them had issues with their, occlusion, dental, orthodontic sort of profile was really making it hard for us to achieve our goals. And so I entered into some further training, as you mentioned before, in orofacial myfunctional therapy. And that was like falling down a rabbit hole and led me ultimately to a lot more training in the area of breathing and sort of breathing therapy. And sometimes we talk about breathing retraining. And the more I studied, the more I realized that the speech thing that had originally led me to that area of practice was actually incredibly relevant to occupational therapy. And really every single course that I turned up at, even when I was going to a conference with a bunch of physios to learn about gait, I'd be looking at all of these case studies thinking, oh my goodness, look at all of these clients who are standing there with this textbook, oral motor dysfunction and also breathing dysfunction. And I think that certainly for me now, I really enjoy working with infants. It's really wound its way back through the lifespan as well. And so just seeing little kids, babies who are days old sometimes, who have got what I guess I would describe as oral dysfunction, and helping them and thinking that we can move the trajectory of their development in a better direction is just really exciting for me. I always follow up really quickly when I say that, though, to mention that it's never too late. Even, in adulthood, you can still improve your function and your quality of life. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
In a snapshot.
Yeah.
No, amazing. So if we dive into the breath and
Mhm.
as it relates to occupational therapists,
Yes.
how is it relevant to the work that we do? Because obviously you're a speechy and you're an OT, so you've got this integrative lens that you look through.
Yes.
How is it relevant to occupational therapists?
Look, I really think that there wouldn't be an OT out there working in any setting for whom this isn't relevant. And look, maybe that's just because I'm a firm believer that every person would benefit from having an understanding of breathing. But I do think that for us as therapists, it's a very powerful tool to have in our kit. The way we breathe affects the way we live. It affects us physically and emotionally. It affects our mood, our regulation. It's just really so central to our well-being at every level. And I think that's something that is core to OT as well, understanding that mind, body connection. And you look, breathing retraining or breathing work seems really silly to a lot of people because obviously we're all breathing because we're alive. But so many people these days aren't breathing optimally. And, I suppose it's the case with a lot of things. Just because it's common doesn't mean it's normal. And that is a conversation that I end up having with clients often, because we'll see, children particularly who will have similar patterns to their parents. And often, again, that's opening up a whole new world and of consideration for sometimes the adults and whole other family members who have been searching for answers and ways of improving their own well-being. And this is often something that is very well, it resonates for them, even the parents. So we start with the kids and move on to the whole family. But yeah, bringing it back to OT, I mean, like in my setting, for example, as you've mentioned, I work with kids with learning disabilities often and autism. A lot of those kids will have low muscle tone. People with low muscle tone, that doesn't just affect the greater limbs, it can actually affect your face. And so you might be more inclined to have an open mouth posture, and you might be mouth breathing for that reason. So generally speaking, we don't consider mouth breathing to be optimal. You might have, again, clients who are coming to see you because they have issues with regulation. And if you have kids who are anxious, or adults as well, in any setting, I mean, mouth breathing is usually a mild form of chronic hyperventilation, which is putting you into fight or flight. And so if you are working in the mental health space as an OT, having an awareness of breathing is really, really important, and sort of being able to work on posture and tackle that almost from a more objective, I feel like, physiological standpoint. We're not just using the mindfulness piece and these sort of cognitive strategies for managing stress and anxiety, but we're coupling it with something else that really works from the body, from the inside out, and is also effective. And I think will be, again, I say, a useful tool in the kit because it helps you get the most out of what you're actually doing with your clients. I do think that mindfulness strategies are really important and effective because they take us away from what we're sort of ruminating on. But if we're coaching people perhaps to do some breathing strategies that aren't optimal, we could be undermining it a little bit. And so the exciting thing is that if you, with a little bit of knowledge, you could be actually doubling the positive impact that you're giving someone.
Yeah, I love that. And so is breathing something that you routinely assess with clients that walk through the door, or do you pick and choose who you do an assessment on?
Yeah, it's something that I cannot turn off. I feel like I'm routinely assessing every person I speak to every day.
So yeah, it is really relevant to any occupational therapist in any setting, in any practice area that they're working in, and potentially it could be something that we are routinely assessing.
Absolutely. I think the OTs who work for me always sort of say, oh, when I first came here, Kate mentioned this breathing thing to me, and I thought, yeah, that's fine. And then as I start training them and we're going through it more and more, I've, sort of had people realize, sort of say, oh, I'm seeing it in all my clients, Kate, like they're all walking through the door. I can see that they're in the waiting room, mouth breathing, and then we're working on these goals as you've identified, or perhaps they've come in for something like pencil grip or handwriting issues, but we're actually also picking up on the more overarching issues with regulation, or we notice that they have got low muscle tone and a whole constellation of other, functional issues that might be going along with that. And they're like, they often will say to me, am am I imagining this is just happening because I'm working in this practice where we've got this focus, or why didn't they mention this at uni? And so it's not that people are walking through our door with breathing dysfunction just because we've got it on our front door. I do think that with an awareness, every OT in every setting would be able to be, again, just keeping their eye out and looking for the signs and symptoms of suboptimal breathing in their clients.
Okay, so let's dive into that. What is suboptimal breathing or dysfunctional breathing?
Yeah, well, look, and good, yeah, catching onto the language. I mean, in a sense, there's so many different words that we can use. You might hear people talking about good or bad or poor breathing. I think wearing my therapist hat, I'm always trying to choose my wording carefully. I do talk about dysfunctional breathing quite a lot, but when I'm talking to a family, I tend not to use words like dysfunctional if I can. So I might say suboptimal, but even that sounds a bit jargony too. So maybe I will use words more along the lines of normal or healthy or ideal, something like that. I will also just chat about language a little bit more. We sometimes speak about the over breathing that I mentioned before, which is also considered, I suppose, to be a bit more sort of family friendly speak for hyperventilation. It's when you are breathing in larger volumes of air than is ideal, what your body needs. But I think one of the biggest distinctions to make when we're talking about what is normal or ideal breathing and dysfunctional is whether or not you are breathing through your nose or breathing through your mouth, with nasal breathing being the optimal way to breathe, as nature intended, is pretty much what we say. We talk about this with our clients a lot. We don't see creatures in the animal kingdom mouth breathing. And so sometimes I do find that I've got clients who may be doing yoga classes, or even kids who are working on or being taught mindfulness strategies at school, who are taking big breaths in and out through their mouth. But we tend not to encourage that. We tend to kind of lean more towards gentle breathing. So the quickest answer I could give you to the question, which I haven't done, sorry, but is that breathing should be through the nose. It should be completely effortless. It should be relaxed, and it should be silent as well. So a lot of the clients that we see are not silent in their breathing, and you're sitting on the floor with them and just sharing the space with them, and you can hear their breathing. And as a therapist, note that and be prepared to flag it to your client, whatever, if it's an adult, or flag it to a family, because I think that these sounds are normal to them, and they're not noticing it as being something that's different, that might be a sign of something that could be addressed and improved to as something that could be relevant to developmental outcomes and whatever. So it's a subtle observation sometimes.
Yeah. And so you've mentioned mouth breathing a few times now as being suboptimal. Can you describe the difference then of what happens in the body when we're talking about nose breathing versus mouth breathing? Like, what's the difference there?
Yeah, well, I think one of the first things is that obviously the size of the aperture is different. So our nostrils are a lot smaller than our mouth. So again, I've sort of spoken about that volume that we would be inhaling through our mouth, and exhaling would be a lot larger than what we'd be taking in and out through our nostrils. So what's optimal when we're breathing is, having the right balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide in our lungs. And when we are breathing out, there's always going to be subtle differences in what individuals do. There could be some mouth breathers out there who aren't doing this, but generally speaking, we, talk about the fact that we're probably blowing off more carbon dioxide than we should be. Sometimes we have this idea that carbon dioxide is a waste product, it's bad, and that we should be expelling it from our bodies. But in fact, it's actually a really important relaxant, a natural relaxant in our body, and a vasodilator, and it helps with the uptake of oxygen. When we end up low on carbon dioxide, we end up deoxygenated as well. So if we are taking these bigger breaths and, blowing off too much carbon dioxide, that's an issue. It upsets that really finely tuned balance that we're supposed to have between oxygen and carbon dioxide. When we breathe through our nose as well, basically we're moistening the air. So when I'm working with kids, I talk to them about snot and the fact that we don't have boogers in our mouth. And that's okay, but it's really great for air to go through and be moistened by all of the stuff that's in our nose. And this is just protective, really, and reduces our risk of, getting sick. And also we have, as we know, little hairs in our nose as well that filter that air. And nitric oxide is also an important gas. And when we breathe through our nose, we are producing a lot of nitric oxide that comes right down into the lungs. And that really is also helping with that gas exchange at the real periphery of those lung boundaries. So if we breathe through our mouth, we don't get the nitric oxide. We're probably blowing off too much carbon dioxide. The air is cold, it's not moistened, and breathing's not as comfortable usually, unless it's what you're used to, perhaps.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So why would people be breathing through their mouth? What are reasons why people would do that?
Well, one of the biggest things would be to think about what their nasal patency or what their nasal airway is like. Have they got an obstruction in their nose? Big tonsils and adenoids are something that we talk about a lot, and that's why multidisciplinary care is so important. Getting an ENT who will actually look properly at structures is vital in order for us to proceed with our work, I think. And look, sometimes there can be an easy fix with a surgery there, but sometimes it might be allergies as well, which is harder, but we can still manage allergies. And just, I think, educating our clients about the importance, particularly for children who can't do these things for themselves, of staying on top of antihistamines and pushing forward with nasal sprays. And if they're not working, going back and talking to the specialist again. I do have kids who are have allergies and are on programs that are going to take a year or two to bring down their sensitivity to certain allergens, but the lifelong health benefits of that are going to be huge and worthwhile, I believe. So that's the first one, is that you can't breathe through your nose, basically. I might just mention as well, you might have a structural difference like a deviated septum or something like that. And really, that's not uncommon in the clients that I see. I'll jump over to the next possible cause, and I'm going to say tongue tie. So tongue ties is, they're controversial topic. It's a hot topic. But look, people who are working in this area, do know what they're doing. We do a full functional assessment and a full structural assessment. And I do think that it's something that OTs can be qualified to do if they've got the right training. And in America, they certainly are doing this. And so if this is something that you are hearing about as an OT and you're like, oh, that sounds interesting, or I'd love to work with infants, and this is certainly something very much in our scope. What I would often explain to my clients is that we picture a tongue tie being a restriction underneath the tongue that's right up to the very tip, but it's not always the case. Sometimes the restriction is more in the posterior part of the tongue. There are different grades of tongue tie. Really, a tongue tie is a bit of fascia that hasn't been reabsorbed into the body at that stage of gestation. We actually start swallowing in the womb at around 8 weeks. And so if we haven't had that fascia absorbed, even at that time, months before you're even born, that tongue will not be functioning optimally. And it's the action of the tongue making contact with the palate and, stroking that bone that stimulates its growth and its expansion. So what we'll see is infants on their first day of life with a high palate that's very narrow. So when we have kids or adults or babies who have a structural difference like a high palate, we should be looking very closely at the tongue. And the research has been done now to show a direct correlation between issues elevating the tongue and the growth of the palate. But I'm getting back to the nose with this story, because basically, if you have a really high palate, you may well have a deviated septum as well, because where else is the bone going to go but up into the nose? So if you're looking into someone's mouth, and you don't have to be diagnosing anything, I think that's almost the most empowering message I'd like to share, is that we're all just screening and looking out for stuff. It doesn't, I don't think that this is something that speechies have to feel, the OTs have to feel speechies have more kind of authority on, because even a speech pathologist isn't going to be diagnosing a malocclusion. We can see and notice, and we say this looks like, but I'm just noticing this looks narrow to me, and I'm making a referral to an orthodontist for a formal diagnosis, or I'm wondering about your nasal airway, whether or not it's good enough, because I can see how high your palate is, and I just wonder, so let's see what the ENT says. This is where we are the people who are meeting children and have, I think, then that, special opportunity to give them every opportunity to have all of their health issues that are impacting their development, or for whatever reason they walked in our door. I think all of these things are often connected. And so that's why we're trying to, look at the whole picture. Sorry, I ran right off topic there, but we've got nose, we've got tongue tie, and I would say low muscle tone, and I think that's a big thing that I believe in because of my training as an OT. And I think that I feel more confident in identifying and describing because of my background in OT. And because I'm not just looking at a mouth and seeing this open mouth, I'm also looking at the child who's W sitting and got hypermobile elbows and really bendy finger joints and all of that other stuff. So I can sort of look at the entire, the whole body and their overall posture to feel confident in that clinical description.
Yeah, right. Can you make the link between that low muscle tone and the breathing?
Yeah, so I think that it might just be if your mouth is open, then you are breathing through your mouth, which isn't always the case. You can actually be a nasal breather with an open mouth posture. This is where it gets a little bit fuzzy in terms of the research, and I think things will eventually get there. So that there is controversy in the orofacial myfunctional therapy world, but I have had it explained to me certainly that when we have an open mouth and jaw, that our tongue and our hyoid bones swing down and compress the airway, and that pushes us to have a flexed or a forward head posture. Because that open mouth is actually compressing our airway. Okay. And I feel my little simple test that I that I do is basically just sitting up really straight and opening my mouth and breathing through my mouth. I can feel that my airway is not as open, and if I move my head forward, I can breathe okay. And that's why, again, just bringing it back to OT, I do see this flexed head posture all the time in my clients. Even if I've got an 18-year-old walking in my door for an HSE special provision handwriting assessment, they're going to walk in with this open mouth posture and this, forward head position. And then I'll look and see when they smile that they've got crowded teeth and a narrow palate and all of that other stuff, which I might not discuss with them on the day if they're about to walk into their HSE, but it's certainly everything does sort of, it's a clinical profile, as I say, that once you're looking out for it, I think you'll see it again and again.
I've got so many questions, Kate. Oh my gosh, every time you talk, I've got like 10 more questions to ask. I'm
happy to let you do that, but actually I might even say one more thing just because it feels vaguely relevant to the stuff I was talking about before with I guess just the tongue tie and the tongue function in gestation. And that is, I guess, the training with some people that I've done in America is really just thinking about the impact of that oral dysfunction on our central nervous system and our entire growth, of that system. And so when we, think about the babies who might then get to the end of their gestation and not have all of their reflexes you sort of integrated and ready to go at, where we'd expect them, and then need to have an assisted birth, and then do arrive unsettled or even quite downregulated. And, that all of these regulation issues, like when we are looking at kids who are older and are referred to us because they've got sensory processing differences that are impacting their function, I would always say, check out the oral function, because there are certainly a lot of OTs out there who would explain that that's at the epicenter of all of their other sensory processing differences. Wow. And I do see that in my practice, I believe. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I mean, from here we can go into assessment of oral motor function. Like how do we assess? What are we looking at?
Well, look, I think if we talk about the breathing stuff, you could just imagine, as I was starting to say before, is the breathing audible? Have they got their mouth open? Do they seem to be mouth breathing? Adults will often tell you if they are, although sometimes if they've done a lot of reading about it, they might say, oh no, I'm pretty sure I'm a nasal breather. And you're sitting there thinking, I didn't see that in my waiting room. So other, superficial signs are things like dry, chapped lips, or even sores around the mouth. I see that in kids often. And, parents might say to me, oh no, they've just got really dry lips today because it's windy outside. It's like, but they've obviously been licking their lips and have, again, licking your lips is an oral habit. We see oral habits a lot in kids with, oral dysfunction. Trying to sort of go back to the breathing, if you were focusing just on assessing that, you might notice more movement in the upper parts of the chest, the accessory muscles that wouldn't normally be activated when you're at rest. And yeah, I mean, just going into case history, I think is really, really important. Just understanding what we can draw from a lot of the questions that we ask about pregnancy and the birth and any interventions that happen there, and how that baby was in the first days of life and the way they were fed and how they went with that. And, just probing it as much as you can, just because they're all little signs and symptoms of oral dysfunction that help you to figure out whether or not you're on the right track, because it's very sensitive. We talk about this a lot at work. You don't want to be, that narrative that everybody has around a birth story, and that early stage of someone's life is just so precious and personal. But just trying to see whether or not there was some signs there that were perhaps not framed in a way that was identifying that there might be some risk of issues down the track. I'm thinking about things like reflux, a lot of, oh yeah, no, they threw up a lot, but they were a happy chucker, so we never worried about it. All of those sorts of things. And even just, talking about the milestones and whether or not perhaps they achieved their milestones out of sequence. Sometimes, as we all know, when we're taking case history as well, people just forget unless you go in and ask. So whether or not that baby's had plagiocephaly or plagiocephaly, whether or not they accessed any early physio. By the time a child's 5, 6 or 7, people have forgotten about that stuff, that they had a torticollis and all of those things, which are just really things that we frequently see in the case history of our clients. I would be asking as well about, obviously we ask about ear infections and glue ear. Those are really symptoms of oral dysfunction. The little muscles that connect to our eustachian tube should be activating when we're swallowing and chewing functionally. And when we don't, and again, our low muscle tone kids are really like high on the list of people who have that sort of profile, then the tube doesn't open and close, and we have this glue ear. And so if you've got a client who's gone and had grommets inserted, then we should be making sure that we look more carefully at their oral function. Oral sensory seeking, as I've said already, is a big thing, I think, to keep an eye on. And looking out for habits like thumb sucking and nail biting, chewing their hair, chewing their shirts, or whatever it might be. Just fussy eating as well. Parents will describe things, as we all know, in different ways. So just really keeping your mind open and your radar on for anything that a parent might share with you about their child that they've noticed that might be related to this.
Yeah, that's a great tip. So it sounds like you do a bit of a screener and a case history. Do you do any formal assessments as such, or it's mainly just sort of a screen of how they're breathing plus that in-depth case history?
So for the breathing, that's what I would do. For oral motor assessment, I will be looking at the tongue function and looking at lips and feeling, as well as looking at their range of motion and what they can do. With the tongue tie piece, it's one of our great myths that we're always trying to bust, is that if you can poke your tongue out, you don't have a tongue tie. But a lot of people can actually extend their tongue out quite far. It's tongue elevation and suction towards the palate that's really critical. But we look at whether or not you can dissociate your tongue in isolation from the jaw. So we're lifting it up, we're moving it down. Can we isolate the lateral margins of the tongue, like to do basically, curl your tongue like a taco? We wiggle, waggle it back to front. We do clicks, all sorts of things. We puff our cheeks out, see how strong they are. I mean, we're assessing the soft palate there as well. And these are things that I think if they had the training, I'd be quite comfortable with OTs doing as a way of screening kids. And I will say as well, because so many OTs work in the area of feeding from a sensory perspective, but I'm just really, really passionate about the fact that I think all kids should be having a thorough oral motor assessment and a structural assessment before we enter into the sensory stuff, because I do see, not that infrequently in my work, kids who've been doing sensory feeding therapy for a long time, and then we check in their mouth and they're really seriously tongue-tied. And you can understand why they're not eating certain foods. They're just protecting themselves. They're keeping themselves safe. And so we have to then go back and take a different approach. And I think that the sensory sensitivities at that point aren't artificial. I think that they have by that stage developed some genuine aversions and sensitivities, and they've still got a really hyperactive gag reflex because they haven't been able to, desensitize and shift it back through, developmentally appropriate exposure to, oral activity. But I think that if OTs were thinking about that way, and again, even if they were just sort of screening the structure, just have a look. Like, you're not going to hurt a child by having a look in their mouth. I mean, if they're really, really distressed, maybe wait till you've built up a bit more rapport. But otherwise, checking it out before you launch into that sort of feeding therapy, I think is really always a good idea. And I guess I'm just thinking something else I was thinking of is just note speech issues as well. Even though you are, even though we're talking to OTs, if you know that a child is seeing a speech therapist, they might not be a speech therapist who's got a background in orofacial myfunctional therapy. They might not be doing that sort of functional assessment. But if a child is working on a lisp, which is where your tongue pokes out on like an S or a Z sound, and sometimes we even see an impact on an sound or a k or gut sound, you can take the note of that and you can flag it to the family. You're not taking over and changing a diagnosis and whatever, but you are, again, just aware that that is another possible symptom of reduced oral function that isn't probably going to be resolved as easily, potentially not at all, unless these overarching issues with breathing and, establishing lip closure and a tongue rest posture on the palate. If we don't fix all of that stuff, everything else is going to be much harder to achieve, possibly unattainable.
And it is just having this curiosity, isn't it? It's just like constantly being curious to look at that next thing and what's going on here, and where do we start?
Yeah, that's right. And look, again, there's talking about oral habits. There's just so many things in my mind, because, we would all know that if we're working, like we work in a very much relationship-based model here as well, in our OT world. And so a lot of those kids are dysregulated and will, again, probably have oral habits that are very soothing and regulating. And, depending on what the priority is for a child, we're not going to be sort of saying, oh, yep, let's go and yank that thumb sucking habit off them, or, take that ditty away, or whatever it is that they're using to soothe themselves. But I think if you are noticing that that is the way a child is soothing, that you can still question whether or not that way of soothing has been driven by an underlying need as well. Because we do have, particularly in our NDIS clients who have, different developmental profiles, a lot who are, approaching high school, who are still sucking their thumb, sucking their blankies. And that then becomes, as a teenager goal, quite important and linked to their social kind of confidence and social goals. And we can talk to them, though, in a way that's really positive and not at all shaming about that. Like, oh, you know what? Our tongue has a job to do. Our brain actually really likes the feel of our tongue being on our palate. but your tongue, it's a bit tied down, or it's not very strong, or you've got low muscle tone, which doesn't sound so bad. And so it hasn't learned to do that. But we can do some exercises, we can work on this. And then when your body feels ready, we can try and, shift your thumb out of the picture. And yeah, it can be really sort of positive. It doesn't need to be something that you are ambushing a vulnerable family with. If you feel like, I suppose that's
like Kate feels like she's always thinking about it. She's ready to come in with her tools and tips.
Yeah. But I think you can still notice it and have a really long-term plan in place for that family as well, and for particularly for a child.
Yeah. Well, let's go to strategies and intervention approaches.
Yeah.
How do we teach our clients to breathe optimally? Like, where do we start with this?
Look, I like a lot of the Buteyko principle. So if you do want to walk away and do a bit of reading, you can start off with that. I mean, I think the most essential.
How do you pronounce that, Kate?
Buteyko.
How do you spell it?
Buteyko. He's a Russian guy. And his work has also been used a lot in treatment of asthma, which again, some OTs and physios would really view that they do breathing therapy and would be comfortable to say that they treat asthma. I don't. But look, it's possible that if I had a client and they were doing this stuff, they might report some improvement in their symptoms. But basically, the aim of that is to sort of move away from the over breathing or the possible hyperventilation and the mouth breathing, and to just be breathing more slowly and gently. We have in our lungs, a volume of about, say, 5 liters. And so many people sort of picture when they're taking deep breaths, I guess this idea, I think they do anyway, of like really inflating your lungs to its maximum capacity being a good thing, and then, blowing everything out. But actually, if we blew everything out of our lungs, they would collapse. And the other way wouldn't be very comfortable. So what's optimal, and nobody can see this right now, but if I'm doing like a little wavy motion through the air, is really, we talk about a tidal volume of about 500 milliliters. Just as, we just have this gentle, like, in and out. And in fact, our lungs remain, sort of partially inflated all the way through that. And so I guess just doing education with our clients and building up like a mental image of this more gentle kind of healthy tidal volume. You can use images like picturing a little cloud and maybe shrinking your cloud a little bit. Sometimes people who are really anxious will get very stressed out at the idea of thinking about their breathing, and let alone being told we're going to take away your mouth breathing and I want you to start breathing through your nose straight away. But you can start by talking to them about just breathing more gently. And what you'll probably find is that if they get comfortable with that and they're doing that with their mouth, then they will get to the point where they can transition to breathing more gently through their nose as well. The Buteyko stuff does also include some other strategies, things like breath holding. The sort of science behind that is that when you hold your breath for a few seconds, the carbon dioxide that I was talking about before builds up in your system a little bit. And so you are resetting your biochemistry and getting recalibrating. Basically, that's what breathing retraining is, in that your body's getting used to having those sort of slightly higher levels. I tend not to do that sort of stuff with kids because I just don't like to tell kids to hold their breath or whatever. I do really think that you can still have a powerful positive impact by just getting them to breathe more gently. And so many kids with, say, ADHD and autism, or I always get tripped up here as well with my language thing. I have some good friends who are autistic advocates. And so if I have my autistic children who might have low muscle tone as well, they may or may not have developmental disabilities, even just thinking about their breathing is quite a huge thing. And we can start with lying on our backs. And you can see a lot of funny things coming in once they start thinking about it, and they'll be breathing in different rhythms. You'll see their tummy popping out and their head going back and their shoulders moving and all sorts of things. So it can be months to get to a goal like, I can lie flat on my back and nasal breathe for 1 minute. That can take a long time, but it's a worthwhile goal, as I say. And if you think about how hard it is to achieve that goal, that is really, I think, showing us how dysfunctional their breathing is and how important it is for us to be working towards that goal. So there are other strategies that, again, I have got a course called the Breathing Link where I go a little bit more into sort of treatment options, but I would say read up on Buteyko, and we just practice using that nasal breathing gently as best we can in, increasing levels of challenge. So we might move from sitting or lying to sitting, walking, that type of thing.
And how do you incorporate it outside of the clinic? So you can do the lie down for 1 minute and we'll see how you go, but how do we incorporate it into everyday life?
Yeah, well, that's where this idea of functional breathing, which I love, because Rosalba Courtney is an amazing osteopath, and functional breathing is sort of her coined term. But it is brilliant. But to me, I'm like, I'm an OT, of course I'm functional. when I hear about this stuff, I want to know that we can do this breathing in all sorts of different environments and through different activities. I guess what I would say is being mindful and aware of how you're breathing when you're doing different things is a great starting point. And you may set yourself little goals, like I always nasal breathe when I'm pushing my pram up the hill. And I always think about my nasal breathing when I am putting the washing in and out of the washing machine and putting it up into the dryer, which is actually quite hard physical work for me because I hung my dryer way too high. And so you can bring that into your daily activities, I think. And then, obviously being mindful of it at times of rest and leisure, like if you're sitting on the couch watching TV, for children as well, this is really, really part of the education piece. Like, should you be breathing like a lion is chasing you while you're sitting on the couch? No, that's breathing too much. You are telling your body, I am, scared. You should be in fight or flight right now, when you shouldn't be. You should be relaxing. So we're going to try and, mix this up. So we set little time goals there. But I guess the other thing I would just say is, with the function in mind, I think being flexible and accepting that it is okay to mouth breathe sometimes. Especially if you do have a yoga class that you love and your instructor tells you to mouth breathe, you might not want to rock the boat by explaining that you're not going to do that. And certainly if you feel you can do it and you do feel okay and comfortable and it doesn't give you symptoms, then that's fine. But then you can just be mindful after the class to habituate. What you're habituating is going back to your nasal breathing. Because there are instrumentalists, people who play the flute and the clarinet, they're doing a lot of mouth breathing, but the thing that will affect them will be if they then mouth breathe when they're not playing the flute and clarinet. So just understanding that, again, people, even with labor and childbirth, like there will be times when you feel mouth breathing is working well for you, and that's okay. That's fine. But you don't want to be breathing like you're giving birth like all the time, even though it made you feel great at that point in time.
And so with exercise, so you're saying with exercise, we should be nose breathing. And this is so interesting. Yeah, because my husband came home from work a little while ago and he's like, yeah, this guy at the gym was nose breathing. He told me, he was training for doing some intensive training, and he came home and he got into the gym and started doing his own nose breathing training session. And he did it the whole session. It was like an intense workout. And I was like, God, that's hard. That's challenging, because I'm going to be so mindful of it now. When I wake up in the morning and I go to the gym, I am going to be so mindful to breathe through my nose. I'm not sure I've
Give it a try. You can't, it is doable, and you just have to work towards it. Don't try and do it overnight because your body won't be used to it. But if you, the theory is, when you get to the point where you can, your performance will exceed your PBs to date, whatever. I've also done some training with a physio, Tess Graham, and she is really big on even nasal breathing with swimming. And I'm a swimmer, so this is really cool for me. I do find sometimes that the salt water kind of goes into my nostrils a little bit, but even that almost works as like a flush.
Yeah, a cleanse.
And then my nostrils feel great, and I can nasal breathe really well after I've been for a swim and had a bit of a try at nasal breathing while swimming. So it's really possible. I always forget the guy's name, but I think the world record holder for the fastest marathon time he did it nasal breathing. I think that's the way those guys achieve that level of performance. So yeah, it's really cool.
It is.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating. It's so fascinating. And it's something that we can integrate into our lives. And it's something that we can also use as a tool with our clients. So
yeah, I think that's the thing as well, which I'm sure all you wonderful OTs listening know this, but it's something that is so personal and different from person to person though as well. So this is where it's cool of like playing around and sort of knowing what works for you and feels good for you, but you can present a strategy to someone else and see what they feel it gives them, whether or not it makes them feel also good or maybe not. And just not having that bias, being prepared to let them try something that perhaps didn't work for you. Because we need to remember as well that our breathing needs always vary from day to day. Like they'll vary on your stress levels, on what you've eaten for breakfast, on how much sleep you've had, and that's why the sort of the classic kind of fitness class where we count people's breathing, like breathe in 1 2 3 4 out 1 2, is not what we recommend generally. That's why I've just been using those words of, breathing gently, because even for yourself, that's not going to be the fixed rate that's going to always work for you. And certainly from person to person, it's not going to. So with adults particularly, I find that this can be such a fun and like rewarding kind of focus in therapy. It really builds a connection and a relationship as well when you're sort of working through this. Yeah.
Is there a certain amount of breaths that we should be breathing in? I know you said it differs from person to person.
12 is the magic number per minute. So sort of in and out every sort of 5 seconds. A lot of people do breathe faster than that. Something in that range of like 10 to 14 is considered to be in the average range as well. Yeah. And so people who are anxious and mouth breathers often are breathing closer to 20 breaths a minute. And so we do have a lot of our clients who will arrive and have breath rates of greater than 20 a minute, and then will in a fairly short amount of time be down to more like 14 or 15 breaths a minute, which is really nice and measurable for them, like a gentle way of measuring.
And do you just time that? How do you test that?
Yeah, we do.
Does that change how, like when they know they're getting tested? Because I was thinking then, like if I knew I'd put the stopwatch on, I probably, because I'm thinking about it, I'm being more conscious of my breath.
Absolutely. And when I do my course as well, I make everybody kind of take their breath and their pulse at the start and end of every break. And I just say to them, I know now that you're thinking about it, that it's going to be different, but that's almost why you just have to like dive in and start doing it, because the more you do it, the more that reaction doesn't happen. And you've just got to start somewhere and have a go. With anything clinical. But yeah, definitely it's, I will observe the rise and fall of their chest as well. And sometimes I think my measurement might be more accurate than what they've counted or slightly different, but that's okay. Because at the end of the day, particularly if I've got an adult client with me who's presented because they want to work on it, it doesn't really matter if they're slightly rounding down their figures, because they know that they want to work on this and that they think that they can have improvement. So yeah.
And is that 12 breaths a minute? Is that just for adults?
Yes, I am not going to tell you off the top of my head what it is for children, because I don't tend to tell them and measure it so much. And look, usually for children as well, the breathing work that we do is sort of a lot of tying into our oral motor exercises, tongue strengthening, lip strengthening, establishing lip closure, tongue on the palate, and then the nasal breathing will fall into place with that if we can focus more on the mouth for them. But yeah,
awesome, cool. Well, we might start to wrap it up because I'm sure we could talk all night, but
yes. But yeah, sorry, I could easily talk about it. That's fine.
Well, let's head to the 3 rapid fire questions. So
sure.
Number 1 is, in one sentence, how do you describe OT?
I have already used that word utilitarian today. So it's an allied health profession that's got a variety of functions to just support people to live their best life, really, the healthiest and happiest life they can. I mean, that's where I see it now. And obviously we all know we've got a range of, like education in a range of areas that are helpful to that, from physical to psychological to behavioral and developmental that help us to support people to achieve whatever is important to them.
Yeah, love it. Number 2, what's one healthy lifestyle habit that listeners can implement today?
Well, nasal breathing, of course. But that really is a huge goal, which I think is something I've tried to convey as well. Just to sort of say, I'm going to make sure I nasal breathe all the time is not so easy. I have clients who've tried that before and then they come to me when that doesn't work. So I would just say, to break it down a bit, just be mindful and notice how you're breathing and when, because awareness is the first step. And if that part seems easy for you, then just try and do 1 minute of nasal breathing each night before you go to sleep.
I love it. And I'm definitely going to be more mindful. Number 3, if you could only offer one piece of advice to OTs, what would it be?
To be proud of your profession, because it's just such an honor and a privilege to be invited into people's lives to support them in achieving whatever is most meaningful to them. And just to think about what drew you to the profession. Because if you really understand that connection that you have with the profession of occupational therapy, you can use that as your super strength.
Boom. Love it. So good. Well, Kate, how does everyone find you? If they want to connect with you on social media, your website, can you give us some places to find you?
Yeah, on Instagram, we're Spot Therapy Hub. And there's our website's www.spottherapyhub.com.au. And we're on Facebook as well, Spot Therapy Hub. So yeah, social media is a great way to reach out, and I'd love to chat to anyone, anybody who wants some help. Yeah.
Well, you have been such a wealth of knowledge. Oh my gosh, I feel like all I did was ask questions. So thank you so much for sharing everything with us. It was absolute gold. And yeah, I'm excited to learn more from you on your socials, because I know you do quite a few videos over on your Instagram page. So yeah, follow along to learn more.
Thank you. And thank you again for the opportunity to chat.
Cheers. Thank you, Kate.
Bye.